1 minute, 1 minute. So to all participants, you can now turn your video on. We'll get started in 1 minute.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, je veux vous parler des vaccins et de ce qu'on fait pour la relance après cette pandémie. Je veux aussi parler des mesures qu'on prend pour continuer à avancer sur le chemin de la réconciliation. Commençons d'abord par les vaccins. I can now confirm that Canada will receive over 2 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine every week until the end of August. Following our shipments this month, that means more than 9 million doses arriving in July and another 9.1 million in August. Given the demand for these vaccines, we've also negotiated an option for 3 million more Pfizer doses to be delivered in September. We'll keep getting shipments secured until everyone can get their shots. But at the pace we're going, that target is well within reach. 65% of eligible Canadians have now received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. That makes Canada the G20 country with the highest percentage of the population with a first shot. That is really encouraging. Because the more people are vaccinated, the safer we all are, and the closer we all get to being through this crisis. In other words, you have reason to be hopeful about this summer and this fall. So let's start looking forward to more of what we love, from camping to dinner with friends. Le Canada va recevoir plus de 2 millions de doses du vaccin de Pfizer chaque semaine jusqu'à la fin du mois d'août. Les vaccins vont nous mener vers des jours meilleurs. Hier, j'ai eu l'occasion de discuter avec des bénévoles de la campagne Plus vite, tous ensemble, un groupe qui rassemble des intervenants du secteur commercial et industriel, ainsi que des gens du monde syndical et de tous les milieux pour encourager la vaccination partout au pays. Ils font un excellent travail et on est ici pour soutenir ce genre d'initiative. On travaille tous ensemble dans la même direction. Et en parlant de travailler ensemble, aujourd'hui, je veux aussi aborder un autre sujet très important, la réconciliation. This has been a painful week for so many Indigenous people and communities across the country. On Wednesday, Minister Bennett announced funding that is ready to be deployed immediately to support survivors, families, and communities harmed by the terrible wrongs of the residential school system. $27 million is now available to Indigenous communities to find and honor children who died at these institutions. This is something that communities have asked for, and we've long been here to support that. Of course, we also know that residential schools were only one piece of a larger colonial system, and the work to right these wrongs, both past and present, is far from over. Hier, le plan d'action national a été présenté en réponse au rapport final de l'enquête sur les femmes et les filles autochtones disparues et assassinées. Dans le cadre de ce plan, on a aussi lancé notre contribution, la Voix fédérale, qui décrit ce que notre gouvernement va faire pour donner suite aux appels du rapport final. On accélère notre travail et nos investissements pour améliorer la vie des peuples autochtones, toujours en partenariat avec eux. When we took office in 2015, this was the reality. Indigenous kids were receiving, on average, only 2/3 of their share of funding for education as compared to non-Indigenous students. There was underinvestment in schools on reserve across the country. 0 Jordan's principal requests were granted, and in 10 years under Stephen Harper, there was no serious work done on lifting long-term drinking water advisories. In the years since, we have made progress. Depuis 2015, environ 33 000 enfants ont maintenant de nouvelles ou de meilleures écoles pour apprendre. On a soutenu plus de 828 000 demandes en vertu du principe de Jordan pour que des enfants puissent rester en santé. On a implémenté l'équité en ce qui concerne le financement de l'éducation primaire et secondaire pour les étudiants autochtones, tout en s'assurant que les jeunes aient accès à de l'éducation dans leur langue, adaptée à leur culture et tenant compte des priorités locales. Et partout au pays, on a fait des progrès pour combler des lacunes qui existaient depuis trop longtemps, notamment en levant plus de 100 avis concernant la qualité de l'eau potable à long terme. Et ce ne sont que quelques exemples de ce qu'on a fait. Just this week, in Parliament, we officially created the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We've moved forward so that our citizenship oath now includes recognition of Indigenous peoples. And the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has made it through the House, and I call on the Senate to ensure that it passes very soon. Overall, 80% of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action that fall under our government's responsibility are completed or well underway. This is progress, but there is much more to do. That's why we're giving more control to Indigenous communities over healthcare, as well as making sure there are fewer Indigenous peoples in the criminal justice system. Indigenous peoples across the country should feel safe and respected and should have a real and fair chance at success. Together, this is the future we must all build. Finally, I want to talk about this morning's news that the economy lost 68,000 jobs in May, particularly part-time jobs, because of the third wave. If you lost your job, we're here for you. The wage subsidy, the stronger and more flexible EI, the Canada Recovery Benefit, those were designed for you. We have your back, as long as this crisis lasts. On est déterminé à vaincre cette pandémie et à faire en sorte que tout le monde revienne en force. Merci. Je passe maintenant la parole à la ministre Anant. Anita.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Hello, everyone. With the updated Pfizer schedule that the Prime Minister just announced, we now have the complete schedule from Pfizer for all of our committed doses, including the additional 3 million options announced that we would be purchasing today. That is a total of 51 million doses that will have been delivered from Pfizer before the end of September. I would like to sincerely thank Pfizer for the partnership. We have a complete delivery schedule from Pfizer. Pfizer's deliveries arrive on time and are stable. Thank you so much. Comme je l'ai souvent dit au cours de ces mises à jour, on prévoyait une augmentation constante des livraisons au cours du deuxième trimestre de cette année, et c'est exactement ce qui est arrivé. Right now, we have had 29 million doses delivered to Canada, 25 million of which have been administered by the provinces and territories. And more than 2/3 of eligible Canadians have had at least one dose. Mais le travail n'est toutefois pas terminé. I continue to work with Moderna as well as the U.S. government to stabilize its delivery schedule to Canada. Once that schedule is confirmed, I will, of course, share the details. In the meantime, we know that Moderna will be delivering millions more doses this month and in the weeks ahead. At least 1.5 million doses will be coming during the week of June 14th, for example. And let us not forget that Pfizer is going to continue to deliver more than 2 million doses per week until at least the end of August. Au début de la semaine prochaine, le Canada aura reçu plus de 30 millions de doses de vaccins. Des millions de Canadiens et Canadiennes ont déjà reçu leur première dose et j'encourage fortement toute personne admissible qui n'a pas encore reçu sa première dose à se faire vacciner. In fact, all of my family members including my 4 children, have now had their first shot. One final note. The other day, I had the privilege to meet with representatives from This Is Our Shot, a group of dedicated volunteers working hard every day to encourage as many people as possible to get vaccinated. I want to thank them and congratulate them on the amazing work that they are doing. In closing, Canada is now first in the G20 and the G7 for the percentage of our population with at least 1 dose. The vaccines are here with millions more on the way. That is my sole focus. That is our government's focus, to bring vaccines to Canada for Canadians. Thank you. Merci, Megwetch.
Dr. Tim?
Bonjour à tous et à tous. Nationally, COVID-19 disease activity and severity trends continue to decline. The latest 7-day average for daily cases is just over 2,300, which is 73% lower than the peak of the third wave. The latest 7-day average for the number of people with COVID-19 being treated in our hospitals each day has dropped 47% since the peak to just over 2,300 daily. Of these, on average, 1,000 were being treated in intensive care units, down 31% since the peak, and average daily deaths are down 35% to 34 deaths being reported daily. As of today, over 25 million doses have been administered across Canada, with close to 2.8 million Canadians getting a dose of COVID-19 vaccine in the past week alone. As of May the 29th, 65% of the population aged 12 years or older have received at least 1 dose. As of May the 30th, there have been 44 national reports of rare but serious blood clots with low levels of blood platelets following immunization with the AstraZeneca vaccines in Canada. Of those, 30 have tested positive for the PF4 antibodies, meeting the definition of vaccine-induced immune thrombocytopenia, or VIT. Laboratory testing on the remaining 14 individuals is ongoing. Sadly, among those confirmed cases of it, there have been 5 deaths reported. We offer our most sincere condolences to the loved ones of those who have passed away. Every week, we get closer to 75% of eligible Canadians having received their first dose of vaccine protection against COVID-19. As we pass that goal in the coming weeks, provinces and territories are also accelerating their second dose programs to get more people in Canada fully vaccinated for optimal protection against COVID-19. If you don't have your first shot or haven't booked an appointment yet, now is the time. This includes those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, as well as those with an autoimmune condition or who are immunosuppressed. If you've already had your first shot, thank you. It's win-win. You're now better protected, and you've taken an important step to bring us closer to end the crisis phase of the pandemic in Canada. You can now keep an eye out for when you'll be eligible to receive your second shot. Even if you already have an appointment, be sure to monitor local public health information, as appointment dates may be moved up as supply increases. Getting that second dose is important, both for your own protection and for building immunity in your community. This is a double win-win. While your first dose provides priming immunity, providing most of us with good protection and reducing the likelihood of severe illness, the second dose is crucial for boosting our immune systems to build strong and longer-lasting immunity. We're on the right path to get back to the things that we miss. Let's keep going steady as we go and not let complacency hold us back from a safer summer sooner. Thank you. Merci, Megwitch.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. À l'échelle nationale, nous continuons d'enregistrer une baisse constante de la transmission de la COVID-19 et de la gravité des cas. La dernière moyenne sur 7 jours est d'un peu plus de 2300 cas signalés par jour, ce qui représente une diminution de 73% par rapport au pic de la troisième vague. Quand la dernière moyenne sur 7 jours du nombre de personnes atteintes de la COVID-19 traitées chaque jour dans nos hôpitaux, elle a chuté de 47 depuis le point culminant pour atteindre un peu plus de 2300 personnes quotidiennement. De ce nombre, 1000 personnes en moyenne ont été traitées dans des unités de soins intensifs, ce qui représente une baisse de 31 depuis le pic, et le nombre moyen de décès par jour a diminué de 35 pour se chiffrer à 34 décès signalés par jour. En date d'aujourd'hui, plus de 25 millions de doses ont été administrées dans tout le pays et près de 2,8 millions de Canadiens ont reçu une dose de vaccin contre la COVID-19 au cours de la dernière semaine seulement. Le 29 mai, 65 de la population, soit les personnes de 12 ans et plus, avaient reçu au moins une dose de vaccin contre la COVID-19. En date de 30 mai, il y a eu 44 cas rares, mais graves, de caillots sanguins et de faibles niveaux de plaquettes sanguines suite à l'immunisation avec les vaccins d'AstraZeneca au Canada. Parmi les personnes concernées, 30 ont reçu un résultat positif au test de détection des anticorps dirigés contre les complexes de facteurs plaquettaires, c'est-à-dire PF4, ce qui répond à la définition de la thrombocytopénie thrombotique immunitaire induite par le vaccin, ou TIV. Nous réalisons toujours les tests en laboratoire pour les 14 autres personnes. Malheureusement, parmi ces cas confirmés de TIV, 5 décès ont été signalés. Nous offrons nos plus sincères condoléances aux proches des disparus. Chaque semaine, nous nous rapprochons de la proportion de 75 des Canadiens admissibles ayant reçu la première dose du vaccin contre la COVID-19. Nous franchirons ce cap dans les prochaines semaines. Les provinces et les territoires intensifient aussi leur campagne de vaccination avec la seconde dose pour augmenter le nombre de gens au Canada entièrement vaccinés qui bénéficieront d'une protection optimale contre la COVID-19. Si vous n'avez toujours pas reçu votre première dose ou si vous n'avez pas encore pris rendez-vous, c'est le moment d'agir. Cela comprend les personnes enceintes ou qui allaitent et celles atteintes d'une maladie auto-immune ou immunodéprimée. Si vous avez déjà reçu votre première dose, nous vous en remercions. C'est avantageux sur tous les plans. Vous êtes maintenant mieux protégés et vous avez contribué de façon importante à nous rapprocher de la fin du stade critique de la pandémie au Canada. Vous pouvez dès maintenant surveiller quand vous serez admissible à votre seconde dose. Même si vous avez déjà un rendez-vous, assurez-vous de rester à l'affût des renseignements diffusés par votre autorité locale de santé publique, car les rendez-vous pourraient être dévancés à mesure que les stocks augmentent. Il est important de recevoir cette seconde dose autant pour votre propre protection que pour acquérir l'immunité dans votre communauté. Nous y gagnons tous. La première dose procure une immunité principale qui protège bien la plupart d'entre nous et qui réduit la probabilité de tomber gravement malade. La seconde dose est essentielle pour renforcer le système immunitaire afin d'avoir une immunité forte et durable. Nous sommes sur la bonne voie pour retrouver les choses qui nous manquent. Restons sur cette lancée et ne laissons pas la complaisance nous priver de l'arrivée hâtive d'un été où nous serons davantage en sécurité. Merci, Miigwech.
Brigadier General.
I am pleased to say that as of this week, sufficient doses of Moderna have been delivered to the territories to fully vaccinate 85% of their 18 and older populations and transient workers. In the next week, the territories will receive Pfizer-BioNTech for all their 12 and up youth populations. This is a significant milestone. In total, we have shipped more than 29 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines across Canada. Earlier this week, Canada received its largest single shipment of Pfizer-BioNTech. Deliveries of 2.4 million doses were completed yesterday. Tel que mentionné lors de notre dernière séance d'information technique, les envois du début de juin de Moderna arrivent au Canada en deux parties. Mercredi, plus de 400 000 doses de vaccins Moderna sont arrivées au Canada. Les livraisons devraient achever aujourd'hui. Un plus petit envoi d'environ 100 000 doses devrait arriver au Canada mardi prochain. La livraison aux provinces se fera dans les jours suivants. Cela portera le total de doses livrées de vaccins Moderna à 500 000 pour la première moitié de juin. L'envoi suivant, d'1,5 million, devrait arriver au Canada à la mi-juin. We are continuing our regular discussions with the provinces and territories. This week, we met with each province and all territories in order to better understand their respective vaccination programs and how best we can support their immunization campaigns as we look forward to the summer and beyond. Nous sommes sur la bonne voie afin de distribuer plus de 40 millions de doses d'ici la fin du mois. Le Centre national des opérations continue de travailler avec nos partenaires provinciaux, territoriaux et autochtones à travers le pays pour faire en sorte que tous les Canadiennes et Canadiennes qui le souhaitent puissent se faire vacciner en toute sécurité et dans le plus bref délai. Merci.
Thank you. Before we take questions, I'll just point out that both the Prime Minister and Minister will have to go for votes at a certain point, but just the doctors and Brigadier General will be available. We'll start with questions on the phone. Operator?
Thank you, merci. You may press star 1 if you have a question. Vous pouvez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. La première question de Raymond Fillon, TVA. La parole est à vous.
Merci. Bon vendredi, M. Trudeau. Les communes vont en journée pour l'été dans une dizaine de jours. Allez-vous déclencher des élections avant le retour du Parlement en septembre?
Comme vous savez, Raymond, notre priorité demeure de passer à travers cette troisième vague de la pandémie et d'offrir les appuis aux Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays. On sait que la reprise économique commence, mais il y a encore beaucoup de travail à faire et nous nous concentrons là-dessus. Par rapport aux élections, je sais qu'il n'y a personne qui veut des élections pour l'instant. On est en train d'essayer d'aider les Canadiens avec le travail dans la Chambre des communes. Mais on verra bien en temps et lieu. On sait qu'on est dans une situation minoritaire et on pourra avoir des élections éventuellement.
Qu'est-ce qui vous ferait déclencher des élections cet été? Quelle serait la raison?
Mais je pense que, Raymond, si on regarde le positionnement des autres partis, notamment le Parti conservateur, c'est clair qu'ils ont une vision très différente d'une reprise économique plus forte et plus verte. Nous avons été là pour appuyer les citoyens à chaque étape. On a été là pour investir, pour aider les femmes durement touchées par cette pandémie. On a fait une promesse d'être là pour les travailleurs, pour les familles, pour les petites entreprises, pour les jeunes, pour nos aînés. Et on l'a fait. Et tout à travers de cette pandémie, les conservateurs nous critiquaient d'investir trop, d'aider trop les Canadiens. Or, ce qu'on est en train de voir, c'est qu'on a pu passer à travers cette pandémie de meilleure façon que bien de nos pays comparables à travers le monde. Et nous allons continuer d'investir pour une reprise plus verte, une reprise plus innovatrice et une reprise qui fonctionne pour tout le monde. Il y a des différends importants entre notre vision pour une reprise plus forte et les conservateurs qui se replient encore avec leurs préoccupations de coupure pour lutter contre le déficit. Et à un moment donné, on sait qu'on pourra plus fonctionner en tant que Parlement comme ça. Mais pour l'instant, notre priorité, c'est de travailler pour les Canadiens tous ensemble.
Merci. Prochaine question, operator.
The next question is from Dylan Robertson from the Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead.
Hello, Prime Minister. We've had Indigenous leaders saying it's not appropriate to have bands apply for federal funding to examine residential school burial sites without having a coordinated strategy to ensure the evidence is properly gathered. They say that the funding you've reallocated basically leaves traumatized bands to go through the work of finding their own contractors. You said this week that nobody wants federal agents to come storming reserves, and I don't think anyone's asking for that. The chiefs say they want some sort of coordination. We now have bands in Manitoba appealing to the International Commission on Missing Persons to help guide their work on burial sites. So I'd like to know why your government hasn't committed to an actual strategy for this, and if you're comfortable with global agencies stepping in to fill that gap.
First and foremost, Dylan, as we've said from the beginning, the families and the communities need to be at the center of and in charge of any and all next steps. Obviously, the rigor and the professionalism and the sensitivity and ideally a certain amount of shared processes across the country would make sense. But those are things that the government will not be dictating. Every different community is different. These residential school sites have different significances and different current vocations in communities. Some are community centers, some are museums, some have been torn down. There is a different approach right across the country in regards to these potential burial sites. And I think it's really, really important that we be guided not by what we think must be done in terms of our frameworks, in terms of an approach on international norms, which are all important and should inform the ultimate decisions. But those decisions need to be led by and centered on the families, the survivors, and the communities that are at the heart of this historical and ongoing tragedy.
Follow-up, Dylan?
And Prime Minister, I want to ask you about the Catholic Church withholding residential school records. The Church has not followed its peers in turning over documents. I know your government has asked for records before, but why have you not ramped up that pressure over the past week on the Catholic Church to divulge these records?
Let me just say, Dylan, as a Catholic, I am deeply disappointed by the position that the Catholic Church has taken now and over the past many years. When I went to the Vatican a number of years ago, I directly asked His Holiness Pope Francis to move forward on apologizing, on asking for forgiveness, on restitution, on making these records available, and we're still seeing resistance from the Church, possibly from the Church in Canada. I think it's going to be a really important moment for all of us, particularly Catholics across the country, to reach out in our local parishes, to reach out to bishops and cardinals, and make it clear that we expect the Church to take up and step up and take responsibility for its role in this and be there to help in the grieving and the healing, including with records, that is necessary. It's something a number of other churches, the United Church and others, have done. It's something we are all still waiting for the Catholic Church to do. En tant que catholique, je vais avouer que je trouve ça très difficile que l'Église catholique refuse encore de s'excuser et de participer au processus important de vérité et de guérison dans lequel nous embarquons. Quand je suis allé au Vatican il y a quelques années, j'ai demandé directement au pape François d'être là pour aider les gens à guérir, pour reconnaître le rôle que l'Église catholique a eu dans cette tragédie. Malheureusement, depuis plusieurs années, on n'a pas vu ce mouvement incluant par les autorités catholiques ici au Canada. Alors, je demande qu'en plus de la pression que le gouvernement va continuer à mettre sur l'Église et toutes les institutions de reconnaître leur rôle, je demande aux catholiques à travers le pays de parler à leurs prêtres, de parler à leurs évêques, de passer le message qu'il est temps que l'Église catholique reconnaisse sa responsabilité, sa part de culpabilité, et surtout qu'il soit là pour qu'on connaisse la vérité et qu'on permette à des étapes de guérison qui vont être essentielles. Juste une seconde, s'il vous plaît. Okay. Non, on a une demi-heure avant le vote. C'est bon. Continue.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator. Operator, next question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. The next question is from Jimmy Pashagumskum from APTN. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm on the phone. Is the Prime Minister still with us?
Yes, I am, very much. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Prime Minister. Now, the Canadian government is currently excluding thousands of First Nations families from settlement talks and class action that deals with the underfunding of the child welfare system and Jordan's principle. This is because the Crown believes it can, beat them in court based on legal technicalities. And you said time and time again that nothing is more important to Canada than its relationship with Indigenous people. As a gesture of reconciliation, and I know we've heard that term thrown around a lot this past week, will you reverse this position and include these plaintiffs in the settlement talks?
Thank you very much for your question. Let me first be very clear. We are not fighting Indigenous kids in court, regardless of what political opponents may say. We have been working clearly and collaboratively with Indigenous organizations and leadership across the country on the harm that has been done over the past many years to far too many Indigenous kids, now adults, in the child and family services system. We have recognized from the very beginning that those Indigenous peoples are worthy of compensation, and we will be compensating them. The questions and discussions ongoing with the communities and the leadership is about what the right level of compensation for different groups and different communities are, and those conversations are ongoing. But more than just compensations for wrongs of the past years, we also need to make sure we're moving forward on changing the system that led to Indigenous kids over the past few years continuing to be taken from their communities, taken from their languages, from their cultures. That is unacceptable. And that's why over the past years, we worked with Indigenous communities, Indigenous leadership on reforming child and family services so that Indigenous communities could take care of their kids who are at risk, to put Indigenous language, Indigenous culture, and Indigenous teachings at the center of child and family services. That was what Bill C-92 did, which was passed last year in partnership with Indigenous communities, and something that we are continuing to work on now to not just compensate for the past, but to make a change for now and the future to make sure that kids are supported by community, by language, by culture, even in difficult moments. D'abord, je veux souligner que malgré ce que disent certains politiciens, nous ne sommes pas en train de lutter contre les enfants autochtones à la Cour. Nous sommes en train de travailler avec différents organismes et différentes communautés pour s'assurer qu'il y ait juste compensation pour les jeunes et moins jeunes maintenant qui ont subi des dommages, des blessures mentales et physiques dans le système de protection des enfants au cours des dernières années. Nous avons reconnu que ces individus méritent d'être compensés et nous allons les compenser. La question, c'est quel est le niveau approprié pour cette personne-ci ou cette personne-là, dépendamment de leurs circonstances. Et ça, ces conversations progressent de façon constructive. Mais il faut se souvenir que ce n'est pas juste assez de compenser des gens pour des choses qui se sont passées il y a quelques années ou il y a 10 ans. Il faut aussi mettre fin au système de protection des enfants qui continue d'enlever les enfants de leur communauté, les enlever de leur langue, de leur culture, de l'apprentissage traditionnel et qui les laisse dans une situation difficile au niveau identitaire. C'est pour ça qu'avec les communautés et peuples autochtones à travers le pays, depuis plusieurs années, nous travaillons pour une réforme aux lois sur la protection des enfants. Et parce qu'on a pu passer ce projet de loi l'année passée, on est maintenant en mesure de changer le système de façon profonde pour mieux protéger les enfants maintenant et dans les années à venir. C'est du progrès concret. Il reste encore du travail à faire, mais on va continuer ce travail.
A follow-up, Jimmy?
Yes. Respectfully, Mr. Prime Minister, there's some who might disagree with you. In last September, actually, you said that you would not fight certification. And then you kind of went back on it and said that you want to exclude victims between 1991 and 2007. So these are families who are now adult children. They suffered or some have died while waiting for Canadian government, to provide services that they're legally obligated to. So, especially with the recent discovery, in Kamloops of 215 children in the grave, and to this day, kids are still in danger in care. Some may say that this is an ongoing genocide. As an act of quote-unquote reconciliation, can you commit to the Justice Department to include these people in the class action settlement talks?
First of all, you bring up exactly the right point, James, that the ongoing removal of kids from their communities to live with foster families, to go to other cities or towns where they lose their culture, they lose their language, they lose their identity, needs to stop. That's why we have moved forward to co-develop legislation with Indigenous peoples called C-92 to make sure that child and family services systems across the country, and this, of course, involves significantly provincial areas of jurisdiction, but to get kids, Indigenous kids, out of the provincial system and into a system that is centered in their own culture, their own language, their own communities. This is at the heart of the colonial legacy that Canada has built, whether it was residential schools or whether it is the current articulation of that with kids removed from communities, quote unquote, for their own good because they're at risk. That's unacceptable. And that is something that since the beginning in 2015, we started working on. And we got to a place where we passed groundbreaking legislation to put control over kids at risk back into Indigenous communities, to keep them safe, but also to keep them centered in their language and their cultures. That is the path that we have taken, and there is much more work to do, but we have made significant changes to make sure that going forward, we don't see the kind of trauma, the kind of loss, the kind of abuse that unfortunately has been all too common in the past, and not the distant past, even the recent past of years and decades.
Prime Minister, the federal government has in its possession, in its various archives, documents that were generated both by the federal government and the churches. And these are documents that Indigenous-led groups that are trying to help people and communities like Kamloops, get to the bottom of the unmarked burials. They say those documents are key. You say it's up to Catholics to pressure the church to release those documents. Your government has the documents and copies of many of them. Why not rescind any agreements that give the churches or the Oblats or any other group a say in their release? Why not compel disclosure?
I think if it is necessary, we will take stronger measures. But I think the pressure that we've seen by many Catholics like myself over the course of the past many days, wondering why the Catholic Church in Canada is silent, is not stepping up, is not showing the leadership that, quite frankly, is supposed to be at the core of our faith, of forgiveness, of responsibility, of acknowledging truth. These are things that I am very hopeful that the Catholic Church will very soon change its approach on. And if it doesn't, as you say, Tonda, we have tools that we can use because truth is at the heart of understanding our past and preventing further damage to the future. That's why it was called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we need to have truth before we can talk about justice, healing, and reconciliation. Je pense que avoir les conversations et la pression que bien des catholiques sont en train de mettre sur leur Église, de prendre responsabilité, de reconnaître que au cœur de la foi est l'idée de demander pardon. Je pense et j'espère qu'on va voir une approche beaucoup plus ouverte et responsable de l'Église catholique dans les jours à venir. Mais effectivement, on a des outils qu'on pourrait utiliser si nécessaire, mais je pense que ce serait mieux pour tout le monde que ce soit fait en partenariat et en accord.
Prime Minister Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I just want to follow up on Tonda's question. So, you say that the government has the tools to compel these documents, and you say if it's necessary, you will. Well, how come now is not necessary? What are you waiting for?
Obviously, and I'm not going to get into the details of what tools and what processes and what documents. Let me talk about the basic principles. We have committed as a country to revealing the truth, to sharing the truth, to allowing access to the truth, first and foremost, so communities can understand what happened to their loved ones and grieve them and mourn them and perhaps bring them home. These are the things that are most important for Canadians and for Canada right now. And our role in ensuring that that happens is one that we take very seriously, and we will be there to ensure that the truth is known. Now, before we have to start taking the Catholic Church to court, I am very hopeful that religious leaders will understand that this is something they need to participate in and not hide from, that forgiveness and redemption is a path we all are told we should be walking on through our faith. And I am confident that the Catholic Church is hearing these calls very clearly and is understanding the kind of dismay and grief that many Canadians are feeling right now at seeing the continued lack of action.
David Aiken, Global News. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. So you did a little stock taking in your opening remarks about the TRC calls to action, drinking water advisories. I'd like to do a little stock taking for this week. On Monday, you said you would directly speak to Ministers Bennett, Lametti, Vandal, Miller, and you promised concrete action. 2 days later, Minister Bennett sort of opened the wicket up and said, come apply for money. So is that it for the concrete action? Is there more concrete action that will be coming on the residential schools, et cetera?
Yes, there is much more action to come. There is much more work to be done. As I referred to on Monday, we talked about the fact that we set aside over $30 million for exactly this. Had been working with communities around ways to flow that money, but that has been accelerated significantly this week, and families and communities can move forward. And let me be very, very clear that we will be there with whatever supports are necessary for communities and Indigenous leadership to move forward in the way that is appropriate for their community. It's not up to the federal government to dictate this, that, or the other thing. It's not up to international bodies to choose to come in, although they would be welcome. It is about Indigenous communities having the tools that they need to move forward. It's not up to the federal government to decide what those tools are either. But we will be there and are now engaged in direct conversations with communities that are stunned and shocked and grieving and hurting because of the recent news, and want to move forward in a way that is supporting their families, their elders, their community in the right way. And we as a government will be there concretely with action and resources as they need to for moving forward.
CBC, I'd like to ask you about the past and the present day. You're going to be speaking to Ryerson students this afternoon, and I'm wondering if the events of the past week have made you reconsider the idea of honoring people like Egerton Ryerson, like Sir John A. Macdonald, who this building is named after, whether you think that's still appropriate. And on the present day, after the release of your National Action Plan yesterday, Marion Buller, the commissioner of the MMIWG report, came out and said she was disappointed and she doesn't see why an Indigenous person would trust the government on this issue. So all your words about reconciliation, why do you think it is that so many Indigenous people, or some Indigenous people, don't trust your government or you?
First of all, on the Sir John A. Macdonald building that we're in right now on Ryerson University, where I will be speaking later today, there are lots of really important conversations to have, and I think we need to have them as Canadians who grapple with a past that is not just a historical past, but a past that has impacts on the present right now. I think there are serious and mature conversations we need to have, and I can't dictate whether it's appropriate for this place or that place to carry this name or that name. But I think being eyes wide open about what we choose to honor and commemorate, I think we always need to know, we always need to retain awareness of the past, but awareness that is nuanced and informed and understanding. And the decisions on who we commemorate and how we commemorate them are decisions that we have to take through careful reflection and open and difficult conversations in our communities and in our society. In regards to why there are Indigenous leaders and communities and individuals who continue to mistrust government, I think it's obvious why. The level to which the institutions, Parliament, Prime Ministers have let down Indigenous peoples over the past decades, generations, and centuries is well documented. That's why there's nothing I can say that's suddenly going to make everything all right. That's why the work of reconciliation is hard. And it involves more than just a government. It involves Canadians. It involves organizations and orders of government. It involves individual choices and collective choices. And most of all, it involves action. Action that's going to rebuild trust step by step. And for every boil water advisory we end, for every school we open, for every of the hundreds of thousands of Jordan's principal requests we grant, there's still more to do. And there's still people who continue to be suffering the legacy of colonialism that Canada has laid forward. I don't begrudge anyone their grief, their skepticism, their impatience, because I feel that impatience too. But the hurts and the wrongs, the intergenerational trauma, the layers of barriers and harms that continue to this day, not as part of our past, but as part of our present, require an awful lot of work by all of us. And this government has been and continues to be very serious about moving forward, and moving forward in a way that is in partnership and informed by the work that we're doing together and by Indigenous leadership itself. And as we move forward on the pathways that we announced yesterday and the National Action Plan to end the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, as we look at strengthening community security, as we move to reforming the justice system, as we look to healing and mental health supports, as we look to education, and all the different things that we can and must be doing together, there will be some people who continue to sit back and say it's not enough, and that is their right. But there are others who are taking chances and stepping forward and participating and helping us make sure that we get things right. I'm not going to begrudge anyone the choices they make. But I am going to thank those people who, despite all the hurt, despite all the trauma, despite all the mistrust, continue to believe that working together, that moving forward on these solutions is the only path, not just for reconciliation, but for Canada.
And Minister and Prime Minister will now have to excuse themselves to go vote.
Nope, I still got time. Go ahead.
And good afternoon, Mr. Trudeau. Man Hamidi with the Canadian Press. The United Nations Human Rights Office has called this morning on Canada to conduct investigations into the burial site in Kamloops and in other locations across the country. Former Senators Mary Sinclair and the former chair of the TRC Commission, he said yesterday that Canada also, there should be an investigation, but he said the federal government shouldn't run that investigation. How are you going to grant some accountability and make sure that those who committed these human rights violations in residential schools that led to the deaths of hundreds of Indigenous children are brought to account?
As I've said, we will put the families and the communities at the center of our path forward. What the government of Canada thinks is the right thing to do or wants to do is secondary in this issue. As I've said, we will be there to support what the communities want and need. We are open to international participation. We are open to common standards across the country. We are open to individual approaches for every single one of these communities. We are open and there to be a partner with resources and support for every community in its path for grieving, for healing, and for reconciliation.
Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada. Est-ce que c'est pas un peu facile, M. Trudeau, de critiquer l'Église catholique quand tant de communautés autochtones en ce moment au pays vous reprochent votre inaction comme gouvernement?
Je pense que nous avons tous nos parts de responsabilité sur les 94 appels à l'action de la Commission sur la vérité et la réconciliation. Nous avons travaillé sur 80% de ceux qui étaient dans notre zone de contrôle. On en a accompli plusieurs et d'autres, c'est des problématiques à plus long terme. Mais une de ces recommandations ou appels à l'action, c'était que l'Église catholique, le Vatican, s'excuse. Ce n'est pas le gouvernement fédéral qui peut faire ça. On a fait notre part en demandant au pape de s'excuser, mais nous avons tous du travail à faire. Et ce n'est pas une question de dire « Ah non, moi, j'ai rien à faire, c'est l'Église qui doit le faire ». Ce n'est pas du tout ce que j'ai dit. Nous avons tous du travail à faire et on en a fait en tant que gouvernement, que ce soit des mesures et de la nouvelle législation pour protéger les langues autochtones, pour mettre les communautés autochtones au centre et responsables de leurs enfants à risque, que ce soit de lever plus de 100 avis d'ébullition d'eau, que ce soit au niveau des centaines de nouvelles écoles qu'on a ouvertes à travers le pays. On est là pour travailler avec la communauté et on reconnaît qu'il y a bien d'autres à faire, mais nous ne sommes pas les seuls. Les gouvernements provinciaux, les gouvernements municipaux, les organismes comme les églises ont aussi leur rôle à jouer. Mais les Canadiens aussi ont leur rôle à jouer. On a tous, dans nos vies de tous les jours, des opportunités de s'informer, de s'éduquer plus sur l'histoire du Canada et sur les articulations de ce passé qui existe dans le présent. Et donc, nous allons continuer ensemble, en prenant toute la responsabilité nécessaire, tous et chacun, pour qu'on en finisse avec cette tragédie coloniale.
So I believe the Prime Minister and the Minister have to vote now. The Minister will return after she votes, but we'll go back to the phone as soon as the Prime Minister leaves for questions for the doctors and Brigadier General Brody. Operator, over to you.
Thank you, merci. You may still press star 1 if you have a question. Vous pouvez appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. There are no further questions on the phone line. Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment.
Okay, David Aiken, Global News, in the room. I think this question's for Dr. Tam. Dr. Tam, and this is coming from my colleague Abigail Beeman, who's asking, is there enough sequencing being done to find the Delta variant? And I wonder if you can speak to why an increase in that variant here in Canada makes getting a second dose sooner rather than later more important.
Thank you for that question. So Canada, as a country, does a lot more sequencing than many, especially as the number of cases are coming down. The provinces are, in fact, moving towards sequencing a vast majority of the positive cases, and so that is actually happening. So in discussions with my provincial territorial colleagues and our laboratory partners, obviously monitoring all variants of concern are very important. The Delta variant, or B1617, has been detected essentially across Canada. It is important then to characterize the exact distribution and the trend as well. It is a variant that has demonstrated there's now increasing evidence to show that it is more transmissible and maybe more transmissible, in fact, than the Alpha variant, that B117 variant. So that is obviously a characteristic of concern, which means that in under-vaccinated populations, or if we let go of public health measures and relax some of these in the context of a transmissible variant, that variant could well take off and replace other viruses in the communities. So that might be something, for example, that's happening in the United Kingdom. Secondly, this variant is important at this time because there is some evidence, although not a large amount of evidence, but some, both from a laboratory perspective, but also some real-life data coming out of the United Kingdom to suggest that one dose of vaccines is provide some protection, but not quite as good as 2 doses. So 2 doses of vaccine performed very well. Both the Pfizer vaccine performed very well, and there's also protection afforded by 2 doses of AstraZeneca vaccines as well. This is why it's important to remind everybody to get the second dose. As supplies increase, provinces, you probably heard their announcements just in recent days to get the second doses started in many of the populations. Some of the initial high-risk groups have already started having the second dose, but you'll see provinces announcing second doses for seniors and then and more higher risk populations and those who've had the initial dose early. And you'll probably see that interval come down. Some jurisdictions have announced intervals of about 8 weeks. And so it is very important to get that second dose when variants such as the Delta variant is in our community.
Hey, Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. My question's for Dr. Tam. So I'd like you to comment a bit about this U.S. study with the 7 teenage boys in the United States experiencing heart inflammation within days of getting the Pfizer-BioNTech shot. What should Canadians take away from this development?
Yes, so you're talking about some studies and observation from a number of countries, including the United States and also Israel. So what has been observed, a small number of cases of individuals who are quite young, adolescents and young adults, who've received their second dose, primarily after 2 doses of the mRNA vaccine, and mainly the Pfizer vaccine. And they develop inflammation of the heart muscle and the covering of the heart several days after vaccination, and more often in males compared to females. In general, they are relatively mild illnesses. Some have been hospitalized, but with a short stay, and they are being monitored, of course, for a longer period to see how they recover. But in general, their symptoms appear to improve quickly. So a number of important actions are being done at the moment. One is, of course, to actually try and determine if these events following the vaccine is indeed linked to the vaccine. So those studies are ongoing. But I do think that this is a signal that we need to be taking seriously. What in the Canadian context, of course, not many younger individuals have been vaccinated today, and certainly not many with 2 doses. So as we closely monitor this situation, we only found a small number of reports of pericarditis or myocarditis, that's the inflammatory response after vaccination in Canada. We currently do not see any higher rates than would be expected in the general population, but it is something that we need to continuously monitor. In the United States, they have considered their observations and at this point continuing to recommend this vaccine for younger individuals. And following the usual schedule. But I think it is something that we have to continuously monitor. And I think for individuals who are getting vaccinated, there are some symptoms that they should be aware of, so that if you do develop some acute chest pain, feeling short of breath, your heart rate feels irregular, you need to get yourself checked out. It is something that can be managed and treated. And as I said, the majority of those reported have essentially improved quite rapidly following their initial presentation.
Just follow up, Dr. Tam. What metrics are you looking at I know that you don't want to get too political, but obviously here in Ottawa, we've been told that no one wants an election until the end of the pandemic. What are you looking at to determine what the end of the pandemic looks like for Canada? Are you looking at vaccination rates, hospitalizations? Does Canada need to wait for the World Health Organization to declare the global pandemic over till we really know that we're past this crisis? What metrics are you looking at right now that would help you determine and advise, the political leaders of this country when they can say the pandemic's over?
Well, a pandemic is a global phenomena, and Canada alone cannot determine that. So we might hear from the WHO, for example. But in our domestic context, we know that while Canada has had an escalation in our immunization, in our vaccinations, many countries haven't got there as yet. And the coronavirus is not going to disappear anytime soon. It's in every country, in every corner of the world. So until the world is vaccinated, I think the virus is not going to disappear anytime soon. But what we're looking for, certainly what I have been communicating, is that we're looking towards a time when we're past what I call the crisis phase of the pandemic, when we have to repeatedly escalate our public health response as a result of massive surges in virus activity. So I think the parameters or the indicators that we're watching are, I think, quite familiar to everyone. One is, of course, the activity of the virus and the number of cases, the rates, the trajectory of them, whether they're increasing or decreasing, escalating, the steepness of the increase, the size of the curve, but also the impact on hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and of course, death is a more longer term indicator. So I do think that this is still a time of caution. We are monitoring vaccination rates as well as one indicator. We've suggested that through modeling, if we have 75% of the population getting their first dose and 20% getting second dose, you can begin to lift those measures without overwhelming your health system. And of course, getting 2 doses into everyone means that we're having a safer fall. And what do I mean by that is that I'm looking to a fall where we don't have to keep going back to those very restrictive public health measures, and that our health system can cope. So that we get back into the fall and winter time, not having these crises going on all the time. But there will be continuing, I think, outbreaks upon which we have to act very quickly to respond to. And those outbreaks, I believe, will tend to occur in under-vaccinated pockets of the community. And of course, if there are more variants that are transmissible, that is, or more severe, cause more severe illness that will impact us. But certainly vaccines are playing a major role if we look at countries that have been a little bit ahead of us, and that we can look towards getting back to some of the activities that we are looking forward to. So those are some of the key indicators. We did publish some indicators for how to ease opening up of our social economic spaces. But equally speaking, if those indicators go another direction, we have to, again, act very quickly. But the bottom line is 2 doses of vaccine is going to get us quite far ahead. I have to say that 75% 2 doses is a goal based on the level of vaccination, so that we don't overwhelm our health system. But we can do better than that. I actually think we should keep going. This isn't a threshold or a limit. We've seen some communities getting over 80%, some seniors getting over 90% vaccine coverage. And so we should shoot for the stars, basically.
And we'll go back to the phone for one final question. Operator?
Thank you, merci. The next question is from Dylan Robertson from the Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead.
Hi there. A question for Brigadier General Krista Brody. I'm wondering about expired doses. Provinces keep turning their backs on AstraZeneca. So I'm wondering what the plan is to avoid doses from expiring, and if we're going to send these to COVAX, and how many have actually expired so far.
So we're working very closely with the provinces to ensure that we use as many doses as possible to support their immunization campaigns. For AstraZeneca, the 2 lots that were due to expire on the 31st of May have been extended. They've been extended to the 1st of July. So those doses are still in the jurisdictions and can be used to support the provinces as they roll out their second dose strategy for those who received AstraZeneca as their first doses. We continue to monitor very closely what the requirements are and to match our supply with the demand that's being signaled by the provinces so that we don't waste doses, or so that we minimize the wastage as much as possible.
And a follow-up, Dylan?
Thanks. My follow-up is about the CBC reporting that Brigadier General Simon Bernal has been taken off the vaccine task force, the rollout for an alleged racist comment. They're alleging that he used the N-word at work. I just wanted to ask Brigadier General Krista Brody what it says that we have another soldier taken off the vaccine task force, and also Dr. Tam, what you make of this as you've talked about racism.
So I'm not in a position to speak to the alleged allegations pertaining to Brigadier General Simard. What I can indicate is that we are very focused on the team here at the Public Health Agency to ensure that we distribute vaccines as quickly, as safely, as efficiently as we can in a manner that's fair and equitable to all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you, Brigadier General Brody. Thanks to the support from the Canadian Armed Forces, we're confident that work will just continue and vaccines will be delivered, and the work with the provinces continue. So we're not concerned about that capacity. At the same time, of course, I know actually nothing about the specific incident, but we have to promote safe workplaces, respectful workplaces. There is no place, of course, for racism and stigma and discrimination in a workplace or in our society. It shouldn't be tolerated. So, I think throughout this pandemic, we've seen people coming together to collaborate. And I think that, of course, we need to continue to focus on our strengths and embrace the diversity in our population. And racism is in many different systems, whether it's the health system or other systems of society. And we, of course, all need to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes today's press conference.